A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in to another edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is good to be with you today. Very busy day, very busy week in Washington, D.C., despite the fact that, it kind of looks like gun control may be, I don't want to say dead for right now. What's the line from that old movie, The Princess Bride? I hate saying that it's an old movie now. Mostly dead. I think gun control is mostly dead. Chris Murphy, Connecticut Senator, not ready to pull the plug on any proposed and possible gun control deal. He was telling the Connecticut Post that he actually heard from the White House Tuesday night, hours after Nancy Pelosi had said, yeah, you know what, we're going to move forward with an impeachment inquiry. After that had taken place, Chris Murphy says he heard from the White House saying, listen, we still want to work with you. We still want to try to find, some sort of common ground on expanded background checks. Now, the very next day, Donald Trump, speaking at the United Nations, said that Democrats are getting in their own way in terms of being able to broker a deal. It's going to be hard to get anything done legislatively, he says, while they're, off on this impeachment fight. And I think that is correct here. I suspect that Chris Murphy and whoever he might have spoken to within the White House on Tuesday night, a lot has changed between Tuesday night and now Thursday midday. And I, at this point in time, don't see really any path forward for, some sort of gun control compromise coming from the White House and Democrats in Congress, while those very same Democrats in Congress are trying to remove the president. And Chris Murphy has come out in favor of proceeding with impeachment of President Donald Trump. So it's they say politics make strange bedfellows, but that would be some really strange bedfellows to actually have the White House working with the folks who are trying to impeach him on gun control that they support and his base does not. It's Washington, D.C. I guess stranger things have happened, but I would not anticipate at this point in time anyway those gun control efforts moving forward for the moment. Now, Democrats are still going to try. They are going to do everything that they possibly can to continue to put pressure on Senate Republicans in particular, and President Donald Trump as well. Last week, the House sent 3 gun control bills over to the Senate side, including a magazine ban. And yesterday, we told you about this on Bearing Arms Cam and Company. As the hearing was taking place, House Judiciary Committee holding another hearing on a quote-unquote assault weapons ban that also has a magazine ban attached to it. This legislation, authored by Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island, it does not contain a Beto-style buyback, a compensated confiscation of those firearms and magazines that are banned. This legislation has a grandfather clause that allows individuals who currently legally own those firearms and those magazines to continue to possess them. I kind of thought that at yesterday's hearing, we might have heard Representative Eric Swalwell, who's a member of the House Judiciary Committee, say that the bill doesn't go far enough, that it needs to be substituted with his proposed measure to ban these firearms, and then a compensated confiscation program that would take place in order to try to take those guns out of the hands of the Americans who currently legally own them. But I think Eric Swalwell basically held his tongue yesterday. The important point for those anti-gun politicians there on the House Judiciary Committee on Wednesday was not to get into an argument between whether or not they want a buyback or not, but to try to, impose on the American people the idea that these firearms are so dangerous that nobody should be allowed to own them, right? That they are, quote unquote, battlefield weapons of war. Well, my friend and colleague Tom Knighton at Bearing Arms has a piece today talking about Amy Swearer of the Heritage Foundation, who provided some testimony in opposition to a ban. She noted, among other things, that her mother had a much easier time using an AR-15 than she did using a handgun. And the fact of the matter is that there are some Americans who are going to find using an AR-15 or an AR-style rifle to be a much better option for them for self-defense than using a handgun. There's a individual in Washington State who's actually challenging Washington's ban on 18, 19, and 20-year-olds purchasing quote-unquote assault weapons. This is an individual who is disabled. He does not have a lot of muscle control in his upper body. He said using a handgun, incredibly difficult for him. Using an AR, on the other hand, he says he can do that. He can manipulate the rifle. He could use it for self-defense. But he's not old enough to buy one or own one now legally in Washington state. So, again, there are lots of reasons, lots of answers, frankly, to that question, why do you need an AR? And because it's my right is a perfectly acceptable answer. Because I don't have to tell you is a perfectly reasonable answer. But also because I can't use a handgun as well as I can use a rifle because of my physical abilities. That's also a reasonable answer. The problem is these lawmakers, they don't want reasonable answers. They don't want reasonable legislation. They want a gun ban. And they want to take your firearms away. Now, one of the other individuals providing testimony in opposition to a ban yesterday on Capitol Hill, Dianna Muller with the DC Project. And man, did she give a fiery statement telling Congress that she would not comply with a gun ban. Now, Dianna Muller spent years on the force of the Tulsa Police Department. Years on the force. She's as law-abiding a gunner as you can find. And her message to Congress was, listen, I'm not going to choose to become a criminal. You're going to make me a criminal. And you're going to make millions of other Americans criminals by telling us that we can no longer possess the firearms that we currently possess. And she said, I'm not going to comply with that. And she is not alone. As we've pointed out, on Bearing Arms over the past, few weeks or so, on several different occasions, this is something that the backers of a ban and a compensated confiscation program simply refuse to acknowledge. Beto O'Rourke says, well, people will comply because I think that they will. Now, at the same time, Beto wants to decriminalize marijuana. He wants to provide reparations for individuals who are arrested and charged with pot-related crimes. Why were they arrested and charged with pot-related crimes? Because large numbers of Americans didn't comply with that law. And large numbers of Americans are not going to comply with a gun ban. In fact, I would say it's far more likely you're going to see more Americans refuse to comply with a gun ban than refuse to comply with the drug laws in this country. But already, again, we've seen, I don't know how many states have legalized cannabis around the nation, but they're doing it in violation of federal law, and they're doing it because they say that, it's become too costly, it's ineffective, it's not cutting down on drug use. And yet Beto wants to do to guns what he says has been wrong when it comes to cannabis. He wants to replace the war on drugs with a war on guns, and he believes that people will simply comply when there's no evidence that that's the case at all. New Jersey, their magazine ban. You're not allowed to possess the magazines that you legally owned in New Jersey anymore. And yet the New Jersey State Police say nobody's turned magazines over to them. No record of any local law enforcement agency in New Jersey having magazines, that have been dropped off at the police department. Massive noncompliance. There's not really anything that law enforcement can do about it other than, if they happen to find somebody in possession of one of these magazines, then they could possibly make an arrest. That's about it. New York State, they had a requirement that the owners of so-called assault weapons had to register those firearms with the state. It's estimated the compliance rate's about 5%, according to some of the media outlets that I've seen. They also had a requirement that individuals who legally owned their handguns in New York State had to re-register their firearms. And that hasn't happened either. Hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers have not re-registered their firearms as required under the New York SAFE Act. And again, they just haven't really done anything about it. They extended the deadline for a year. Then Governor Cuomo decided, I'm just going to not talk about it. The state police decided they were going to drop it. I'm sure they're still enforcing the law when, again, they find somebody who has a handgun that wasn't re-registered. But there are, best estimates, 75, 80,000 New Yorkers who didn't re-register. Again, Americans, by and large, are saying, no, we're not going to comply with these unconstitutional and unenforceable laws. Now, what are you going to do about it? And the answer from Governor Cuomo is, well, I'm going to avoid the topic. The answer from Beto O'Rourke is, well, I'm going to fine you. The answer from Eric Swalwell is, well, we'll put you in prison if we catch you at some point. Okay. If you catch us at some point. Again, I don't know that Dianna Muller's comments swayed any anti-gun member of the House Judiciary Committee, but it should have woken them up and made them realize, again, you can put whatever law on the books you want, because that's what lawmakers do, right? They make laws. But it's up to law enforcement officers, like Dianna Muller used to be, to actually go out and enforce those gun control laws. And Democrats are going to have a very difficult time. I shouldn't say Democrats, because there might be some Republicans that go along too. Anti-gun politicians and anti-gun activists are going to have a very difficult time trying to enforce any sort of gun ban and compensated confiscation program that they managed to put in place. All right, what do you say we get to our armed citizen story of the day, our good deed of the day, as well as another story from our failed criminal justice system. In fact, we can start there. Duluth, Minnesota. 35-year-old Travis Bush made threats to shoot up a local school. In fact, he was arrested there at the school. He's now been sentenced for those crimes. 5 years probation. Yeah. Keep in mind, we've got politicians who want to put you in prison for 5 years for simply owning a firearm, but threatening to shoot up a school, currently punished apparently only by probation. 5 years of probation. Judge stayed his prison sentence on Monday in relation with his crimes. He was arrested back in April, according to CBS 3 in Duluth, Minnesota, after making threats of violence online via text message. He was actually found inside Duluth East High School during a lockdown. Nicole Bacon has organized a petition which is seeking to impose additional restrictions on this individual. They can't go back and re-sentence him. They can't say, well, we gave you probation and now actually we're going to give you prison time. What this petition is calling for is for at least GPS monitoring. She says, quote, perhaps certain probation terms could be tightened, could be a bit stricter. She also says this very serious threat personally, and many other community members feel the same way as I do, still remains a very serious threat to this community. She said an individual who had a concrete plan of a mass shooting and the weapons to carry it out to allow him to walk is just unbelievable. Well, again, this is the criminal justice system as it works. And, I would note as well, by the way, that this ties into some of the conversations we've had about red flag legislation, which deals with a firearm, right? Now, this individual is not allowed to possess firearms anymore. So is the problem solved? Because according to supporters of red flag legislation, problem solved, right? This guy went to court. He was convicted of a crime. He lost his right to own a firearm. So why does he need to be in prison? Why does he need to be under any supervision at all? The guns were taken away. That should be the end of it. I mean, that's what we're told when it comes to red flag laws, right? That, if we take their guns away, everything's going to be okay. Doesn't matter that that person's been deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. Doesn't matter that we've left them with matches and gasoline and car keys and sharp pointy knives, the kind they want to ban in England right now. It doesn't matter that we've left him with all those things because we took his guns. And that's what red flag laws do. They take the guns. And they don't treat the individual, which is exactly what these concerned citizens there in Duluth are demanding the criminal justice system do. Deal with the individual. And unfortunately, again, for too many lawmakers, that's hard. They'd rather do something than actually do the hard work that can make a difference. Let's get to our armed citizen story of the day from Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, where a homeowner fought back against a Mississippi burglar. Don't have a lot of information on this story yet. Hopefully we'll get some more. This was late Tuesday night in Jackson, Mississippi. Somebody tried to break into a home just after 11 o'clock. Police say the thief was shot multiple times after he broke into the residence. Wounded burglar was able to flee the scene, but police caught up with him a short time later. He was transported to a local hospital. Last report listed as critical but stable. So not out of the woods yet, but probably going to recover. Police say charges against the burglar are pending. Doesn't look like any charges against the homeowner are pending whatsoever. Well, like I said, we'll see if we can get more information for you on that developing story. And this is weird. Again, I don't go looking for any particular type of story when I go looking for, the stories from the flaws in our criminal justice system. I never know what I'm going to find. Armed citizen stories. I mean, I'm kind of looking for an armed citizen story, but I don't know what type of armed citizen story I'm going to find. Same with our good deeds. I don't go looking for a specific good deed, but I've noticed that good deeds kind of come in clusters, particular good deeds. So it was earlier this week, they had a story out of Florissant, Missouri, where a young man getting ready to go to his first high school dance needed some help tying the tie, and mom didn't know what to do, so they went to the police department, and that worked. Sure enough, her son was able to get some help with the tie, get a chance to spend some time with a law enforcement officer, and all's well that ended well. So, not Missouri. I actually had to double check, make sure this was not the same story, but no. From Utah, different kid, different tie, different cop, but the same situation. A Utah police officer helping a teen tie a tie as he was getting ready for his big dance. Now, this story had been reported all over the place. In fact, I'm not even sure. I guess it really popped up on Facebook. The teenage son mom, Christy Carter, posted this on Facebook, said we were struggling because her son Jake was getting ready to go to the dance. She said his date and friends were waiting and we were rushing to my friend's house to help us. So as they're on their way to get some help tying a tie, by the way, not that I'm, taking anything away from the cuteness of this story, but if you go to YouTube, there are lots of videos on how to tie a tie, and it's not that hard. I say this as somebody who doesn't own, I might own one tie now, and I haven't worn a tie in years. I can still tie a tie. Once you learn how, it's kind of like riding a bike. You don't really forget it, and it's not that difficult. But anyway, too late for Christy and Jake. They were on their way to a friend's house. They got pulled over for speeding. Saw the flashy lights in the rearview mirror. Christy Carter said once they explained to the officer what was going on, well, he was happy to help. She said a big shout out to this Park City police officer who saved the day in an unusual way for a stressful, sinking, single mom moment. He had every right to write me a ticket, but after observing the stress on my son's face and newly out of frustration, this was what he did instead. So grateful. So there you go. Jake even gave him a hug afterwards. So in the right place, at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing, Park City, Utah police officer Mike Carrillo. We thank you, sir, for your good deed. And that is going to do it for this edition of Bearing Arms Cam & Company. Thank you for being a part of the program. On tomorrow's program, we're going to talk with an old friend, Stephen Josie Davis. If you are a longtime Second Amendment supporter, you might remember Stephen's name. Stephen was arrested in New Jersey back in 2013. He was a security guard. He was arrested. He had a firearm, legally owned firearm, in the glove compartment of his car that he had put there basically for safekeeping, and then it was running around trying to get out of the house and forgot to remove it, got pulled over, told the officer, hey, I have a firearm in the glove box, ended up getting arrested, ended up getting charged, was facing years in prison. So he took a plea to a lesser charge, ended up getting 6 months probation and a $200 fine, ultimately was pardoned by Governor Chris Christie. Record was expunged, and Stephen, who had been hoping for a career in law enforcement, actually achieved his dreams. He's wearing the badge now. He is an active duty police officer. And we're going to talk with him about that on the program tomorrow. But it's not entirely a happy ending, because the jurisdiction that arrested Stephan, it happened to be his hometown, is now putting up roadblocks in his quest to become a police officer in the town where he grew up. And we'll get to the bottom of it on the next edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company. Thank you again so much for being a part of today's program. If you like the show in a podcast form, you can find it on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Stitcher, Town Hall Podcasts as well. Of course, you can subscribe to Town Hall Media here at YouTube. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you back here tomorrow with a Friday edition of Bearing Arms Cam and Company.